my son, Daniel, and his wife, Lauren, left me in the dark. Literally, they flipped off the power, locked the front door, and walked away into the rain-soaked night, leaving me alone in that old Portland house. My glasses slipped from my hand as I stumbled in the pitch black, the cold creeping into my bones. They called it a misunderstanding, said I was overreacting when I called, my voice shaking, begging for them to come back. I sat there, on the creaky wooden floor, my breath fogging in the dark, thinking maybe I really was invisible to them now. A 65-year-old woman, no longer useful, no longer needed, but what they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that I'd been hiding $15 million. A quiet fortune, tucked away in investments and a trust from my late husband. They thought I was just a retired schoolteacher, living off a modest pension, clinging to a house they wanted to sell. They thought I had nothing left to offer. What would they do when they found out I could buy their world twice over and walk away without a glance? It was a Thursday night in October. The kind of night in Portland where the rain doesn't just fall, it hums. Steady and soft, like a lullaby you don't trust. The leaves outside were turning gold, piling up in the gutters, catching the glow of streetlights. I'd been staying with Daniel and Lauren for a few weeks, helping with their toddler while they juggled work. Or so I thought. That evening, the air in the house was heavy. I could feel it, the way you feel a storm before it breaks. Lauren was pacing in the kitchen, her phone in hand, her voice sharp as she muttered about some deal gone wrong. Daniel sat at the dining table, scrolling through his laptop, avoiding my eyes. I'd learned to make myself small in their house, to tread lightly, like a guest who'd overstayed. It started with a simple question. Lauren turned to me, her lips tight, and asked, "Cathy, you're still holding onto the house deed, aren't you?" Her tone wasn't curious, it was an accusation, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the rain. I looked at her, then at Daniel. He didn't look up, just kept scrolling, like I wasn't even there. The house, my house, the one my husband, Tom, and I bought 30 years ago, with its slanted roof and the backyard maple we planted when Daniel was born. It was still in my name, and they hated that. They'd been dropping hints for months, casual comments about property values, about how it'd be easier if they could sell it, about how I didn't need all that space anymore. I said, softly, that I wasn't ready to let it go, that we could talk about it later, maybe over coffee, when things weren't so tense. I thought I was being reasonable. I thought I was keeping the peace. But Lauren didn't want peace. She wanted control. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're being stubborn, Cathy. You don't need this house. You're not even living here full-time." Her voice was low, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I opened my mouth to respond. But before I could, Daniel stood up. "Let's all take a breath," he said, but his voice was flat, like he was reading a script. Then he walked to the breaker box in the hallway. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe the lights were flickering. But then I heard the click. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The kitchen went dark. "Daniel?" I called, my voice small in the sudden quiet. No answer. I heard the front door open, then shut. The lock turned. I stumbled toward the window, my hands fumbling in the dark, and saw their car pulling out of the driveway, red taillights fading into the rain. My phone was in my purse, but when I called, Daniel's voice was clipped. "Mom, you're overreacting. We'll talk tomorrow." Tomorrow, as if leaving me in a cold, dark house was nothing, as if I was nothing. My glasses fell as I tried to find my way to the couch. I heard them clatter on the floor, the lens cracking against the wood. My hands shook as I knelt to pick them up, the cold seeping through my thin sweater. I sat there, in the dark, the rain tapping against the windows, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, just a quiet clarity, like a match flaring in a storm. They thought I was weak. They thought I was done. But they didn't know me. Not really. I'd spent decades teaching kids how to think for themselves, how to stand up after they'd fallen. I'd built a life, piece by piece, through quiet choices and careful plans. I'd paid for Daniel's college, covered their wedding, even helped with their first down payment. And all along, I'd been building something else, something they never bothered to see. $15 million. Investments from my years consulting for educational nonprofits. a trust fund from Tom's family, and a few smart moves in the stock market. I never talked about it. Never needed to. It was mine, tucked away in a place they'd never think to look. I stood up, my knees aching, my breath steadying. The dark didn't scare me anymore. I found my coat, my purse, and a spare key I'd kept hidden in a drawer. I stepped out into the rain, the cold biting my face, and walked down the street. Not to chase them, not to beg. To begin, I didn't go far. There was a little bakery a few blocks away, the kind with fogged-up windows and the smell of cinnamon lingering in the air. I sat in the back booth, ordered a tea with honey, and let the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. The waitress, a young woman with kind eyes, didn't ask about the damp hair or the cracked glasses. She just slid a napkin across the table and said, "Take your time, hun." And I did. That night, as the rain kept falling, I booked a rental car and checked into a small inn on the edge of town. The room was plain, stiff sheets, a humming heater, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My hands still shook a little, but my mind was sharp. Sharper than it had been in years. I wasn't going to scream or cry or play the victim. I was going to do what I'd always done best: observe, plan, move. They thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Some stories don't begin with laughter or light. Some begin in the dark, with the sound of rain and a heart that's been quiet too long. But silence, when you choose it, can be powerful. And mine was just beginning. Would you have walked away that night? Or stayed in the dark? Think about it, quietly, in your own heart. Because what comes next, that's when everything started to change. That night in the dark, with the rain drumming against the windows, I saw it clearly for the first time. My son, Daniel, wasn't the boy I'd raised anymore. And Lauren, his wife, wasn't just ambitious, she was calculating. They didn't see me as their mother, their family. To them, I was a signature on a deed, a hurdle to their plans, a shadow they wanted gone. I'm Cathy Harper, 65 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Portland, Oregon, where the rain never seems to stop, and the leaves turn gold every fall like clockwork. For 30 years, I taught high school English, coaxing kids through Shakespeare and poetry, teaching them to find their voice. After I retired, I consulted for educational nonprofits, helping build programs for kids who'd been overlooked. It was quiet work, fulfilling work, but to Daniel and Lauren, it was just nothing. They saw my cardigans, my sensible shoes, my quiet mornings with a book, and assumed that's all I was. They didn't know about the $15 million, the investments I'd made over decades, the trust fund from my late husband, Tom, the careful choices that built a fortune I never flaunted. I didn't need to. I'd always lived simply, in our old house with the creaky porch and the maple tree out back. The house they wanted so badly. Daniel wasn't always like this. When he was little, he'd sit on that porch with me, reading adventure books, his eyes wide with wonder. He was sensitive, always feeling things deeply, too deeply. Sometimes, I'd hold him through his tears, through the times he felt the world was too big. I raised him to be kind, to be thoughtful, but somewhere along the way, he changed, or maybe he just buried that boy under the weight of Lauren's world. Lauren, she came into our lives like a storm wrapped in a smile. A social media influencer, always posing, always selling. Her Instagram was a parade of perfect lighting, curated outfits, and captions about living your truth. But behind the filters, she was relentless. She wanted more followers, more money, more status. And Daniel, my Daniel, followed her lead. He became a sales manager, chasing deals, chasing her dreams, losing himself in the process. They moved into my house last year, saying it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. I believed them. I wanted to. I cooked dinners, babysat their daughter, Lila, and tried to ignore the way Lauren's eyes lingered on the house, like she was measuring it for sale. I tried to ignore the way Daniel stopped talking to me, stopped looking at me, like I was a guest in my own home. It started small, little things, easy to dismiss. Mail went missing, bank statements, my retirement fund letters. Lauren would wave it off, saying, "Oh, I must have misplaced it, Cathy, I'll find it later." But later never came. Then there were the conversations. Always casual, always pointed. Have you thought about updating your will? Lauren would ask over coffee. Her voice sweet as syrup. It's just practical, you know, at your age, at my age, as if 65 meant I was already halfway out the door. Daniel was worse. In a way, he didn't ask questions, he just withdrew. He'd sit at the table, scrolling through his phone, while Lauren talked about property values and investment opportunities. I'd catch him glancing at me sometimes, his eyes flickering with something, guilt. Maybe, but he never spoke up. Never defended me, never said, "She's my mom, I should have seen it coming." The tension had been building for weeks. They'd been pushing harder about the house. About how it made sense to sell it. How I didn't need it anymore. I'd nod, smile, say I'd think about it. But I wasn't ready to let go. That house wasn't just wood and walls. It was where Tom and I laughed. Where Daniel grew up. Where I'd sit in the quiet after a long day and feel whole. That Thursday night, it all unraveled. I was in the living room, folding Lila's clothes, when Lauren walked in, her phone still in her hand. "Cathy," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to talk about the deed. You're holding things up." I looked at her, my hands still on a tiny sweater. "I'm not ready, Lauren. It's a big decision. Let's sit down tomorrow, all of us, and figure it out." Her eyes narrowed, just for a second, before she forced a smile. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Daniel was there, in the doorway, silent as always. I turned to him, hoping for something, anything. "Daniel, can we talk about this calmly?" He didn't answer, just looked at Lauren, then back at his phone. That's when it happened. Lauren set her phone down, walked to the hallway, and opened the breaker box. I thought she was checking something, a blown fuse. Maybe, but then the lights went out. The hum of the heater stopped. The house fell silent, except for the rain outside. "Lauren?" I called, my voice unsteady. "What's going on?" No answer. I heard their footsteps, quick and deliberate, moving toward the front door. I stood, my heart pounding, and stumbled toward the sound. "Daniel, wait." The door slammed, the lock clicked. I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I banged on the wood, my hands shaking, my voice breaking. "Daniel." "Lauren." Nothing. Just the rain, louder now, and the faint sound of their car pulling away. I called Daniel's phone, my fingers clumsy in the dark. When he answered, his voice was cold, distant. "Mom, you're overreacting. We just need space. We'll talk tomorrow." Space. As if leaving me in a dark, locked house was about space. I sank to the floor, my glasses slipping off, cracking against the wood. The cold seeped through my sweater, into my skin, into my bones. I sat there, listening to the rain, and felt something break inside me, not my heart. Not yet, but the illusion I'd been holding onto. The illusion that they still saw me as family. They didn't. To them, I was an obstacle, a signature they needed, a house they wanted. I'd spent years giving them everything, money for college, for their wedding, for their debts. I'd paid for Lila's daycare, for their vacations, for the life they wanted to show the world. And now, they'd left me here, in the dark, like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I'd built that house, that life, that $15 million they didn't even know existed. I'd spent decades teaching, planning, saving, choosing silence over show. And in that moment, sitting on that cold floor, I realized something. They didn't know me. Not the woman who'd raised Daniel, who'd buried Tom, who'd kept going when the world felt too heavy. They thought they could push me out. They thought I'd break, but I'd been through darker nights than this. And I always found my way back to the light. If you're still listening, thank you. This isn't a story about revenge or anger. It's about what happens when you realize the people you love most have stopped seeing you. It's about choosing to see yourself. Have you ever felt invisible to the ones you gave everything to? Hold that feeling, quietly, in your heart, because what comes next is when I started to find my way back. That night, sitting in the dark, with the rain beating against the windows, I made a choice, not to scream, not to beg, not to let the hurt swallow me whole. I chose to move, to act, to take back the pieces of myself that Daniel and Lauren thought they could erase. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. Not at 65, not after everything I'd built. I left the house that night, stepping into the Portland rain, my cracked glasses tucked into my purse, my coat soaked through. I didn't go far. There was a little bakery a few blocks away. The kind that stays open late. With warm lights and the smell of fresh bread. I pushed through the door. The bell jingling softly. And found a booth in the corner. The waitress, a woman with graying hair and a tired smile, brought me a cup of chamomile tea without me asking. "Rough night?" she said. Her voice gentle. I nodded, my hands wrapping around the warm mug. Something like that. She didn't pry, just set a plate of shortbread cookies in front of me and said, "No charge. You look like you need it." I sat there, sipping the tea, letting the warmth settle into my hands, my chest, my thoughts. The rain kept falling outside, streaking the windows, but inside, I felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but clarity, like the fog lifting off the Willamette River at dawn. I wasn't going to stay in that dark house, waiting for Daniel to feel guilty or Lauren to change her mind. I wasn't going to be their obstacle anymore. I was going to be me again. I pulled out a small notebook from my purse, the kind I used to carry when I taught, full of lesson plans and scribbled quotes from poets. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one word at the top: proof. I'd spent decades teaching kids to question, to think, to find evidence before they made up their minds. Now, it was my turn. I knew Daniel and Lauren weren't just careless. They were calculated. The missing mail, the questions about my will, the way Lauren's eyes flicked to my checkbook when she thought I wasn't looking, it wasn't random. They had a plan, and I needed to know what it was. The next morning, I rented a car and checked into a small inn on the outskirts of Portland. The room was simple, white walls, a single bed, a coffee maker that hummed too loudly. But it was quiet, no footsteps in the hall, no sharp voices cutting through the air. Just me, my notebook, and the rain tapping the window like a steady heartbeat. I made a list. 4 things, clear and simple, things I could control. First, proof. Second, protect. Third, plan. Fourth, reclaim. I started with the first. I called Evelyn, my oldest friend, a retired accountant who'd spent her life entangling numbers and secrets for small businesses. We'd met years ago, when I was teaching and she was balancing the school's books. She had a way of seeing through people. Not with judgment, but with precision. "Evelyn," I said when she answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need your help. Something's not right." She didn't ask for details. Just said, "Come by tomorrow. Bring your laptop." The next day, I sat in Evelyn's cozy living room, surrounded by bookshelves and the smell of her peppermint tea. She opened my laptop, her fingers quick on the keys, and started digging through my email. I'd always trusted my instincts. But instincts weren't enough anymore. I needed facts. It didn't take long. Evelyn found it, an email, buried in my spam folder, sent from Lauren's account by mistake. It was addressed to someone named Greg, a name I didn't know. The subject line was blank. But the message was clear: we need to move fast on the paperwork. She's stubborn, but we'll get the signature one way or another. Attached was a scanned document, a draft of a trust amendment with my name on it, except I hadn't signed it. The signature was a clumsy forgery, loops and lines that didn't match my careful cursive. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, but I didn't cry, I didn't panic, I just felt awake. "They're trying to take everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, her eyes still on the laptop. "They're not as smart as they think. This email's a goldmine, Cathy. We'll forward it to my secure drive and lock it down." She did, her hands moving with the same calm she'd used to balance budgets for years. When she was done, she looked at me, her eyes soft but firm. "What's your next step?" I didn't hesitate. "I need a lawyer." Evelyn gave me a name, Susan, a woman in her 50s who specialized in elder rights and financial coercion. "She's tough," Evelyn said, "and she doesn't waste words." That afternoon, I called Susan from the inn, my notebook open in front of me. I told her everything: the dark house, the locked door, the email, the forged signature. She listened without interrupting, her voice like gravel when she finally spoke. "Send me the email, and anything else you have. Bank statements, deeds, anything." I did. I sent her the email, a copy of the house deed, and a list of every strange moment I could remember, every missing letter, every pointed question, Every time Lauren smiled too brightly or Daniel looked away. Susan didn't promise miracles. She just said, "This is enough to start. We'll build from here." That night, I sat in my room at the inn. The rain still falling, softer now, like it was whispering to me. I thought about the $15 million they didn't know about. It wasn't just money. It was years of choices, consulting for nonprofits, investing in education programs, saving every penny Tom left behind. I'd never spent much, never needed to. I lived quietly, in my cardigans and sensible shoes. Because that's who I was. But quiet doesn't mean weak. And simple doesn't mean empty. They thought I was a retired teacher with nothing but a pension and a house they could take. They didn't know I'd been building something bigger. Something they couldn't touch. A trust. A legacy. A future. I opened my notebook again and added to my list. Protect. Move the money. Lock the accounts. Shield the deed. Plan. Meet Susan. File the papers. Stay one step ahead. Reclaim. Not just the house. Not just the money, but me. The woman I'd been before I let their voices drown out mine. The next morning, I drove to the bank. Quietly, carefully, I checked my accounts. The $15 million was safe. Tucked into a trust for a scholarship fund I'd set up years ago. Under a name they'd never connect to me. I'd been careful, even then, without knowing why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was Tom's voice in my head, saying, "Always have a plan, Cathy." I left the bank and walked through the streets of Portland. The air damp, the leaves crunching under my feet. I passed a park where I used to take Daniel when he was little. Pushing him on the swings. His laughter filling the air. I didn't feel sad. Not exactly. I felt resolute. They thought they could leave me in the dark and I'd stay there. They thought I'd break under the weight of their betrayal. But I'd spent my life teaching kids how to stand up. How to find their way. Now, it was my turn. If you're still here, thank you for staying with me. Some moments feel like endings, the dark house, the locked door, the silence of a son who walks away. But sometimes, those moments are where you begin again. Have you ever had to start over? When the people you loved left you behind? Hold that thought, quietly, in your heart. Because what comes next is when I stopped being invisible. The rain hadn't stopped in Portland. But I wasn't running from it anymore. I'd spent too long dodging the storm. Trying to keep the peace. Trying to be the mother Daniel needed. The mother-in-law Lauren wouldn't resent. But that night in the dark house changed everything. I wasn't just Cathy, the retired teacher who folded clothes and made tea. I was a woman with a plan. A woman with proof. A woman with $15 million they'd never see coming. After finding that email, the one Lauren sent by mistake, with the forged signature, I knew I couldn't just sit still. I had to move carefully. Quietly, like the way the leaves fall in autumn. Soft but deliberate. Susan, my lawyer, was already building a case: elder abuse, financial coercion, attempted fraud. She didn't waste words, didn't promise quick wins. "This takes time, Cathy," she said, her voice steady over the phone. "But we've got them cornered." I trusted her. Susan was the kind of woman who didn't flinch, who saw through lies like they were glass. She took the email, the forged document, and every scrap of evidence I'd gathered, the missing mail, the bank statements Lauren had misplaced, the questions about my will that never felt innocent. She was drafting a complaint, one that would hold Daniel and Lauren accountable, not just for that night, but for every calculated step they'd taken to push me out. But I wasn't waiting for the courts to give me back my life. I was already taking it. I moved into a small apartment in southeast Portland, a quiet place with a view of the park and a tiny balcony where I could hear the rain. It wasn't much, a single bedroom, a second-hand couch, a kettle that whistled too loudly, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in someone else's world. I set a folder on the kitchen counter, the house deed, my trust documents, the email from Lauren. It wasn't just paper. It was power. I visited the bank again. Quietly, under the radar. The $15 million was safe. Locked in a scholarship trust I'd set up years ago. Named after a poet no one in my family would recognize. I'd been careful, even before I knew why. The money came from my consulting work. From Tom's trust. From investments I'd made in education programs across Oregon. Daniel and Lauren thought I lived on a teacher's pension. scraping by. They never asked, never wondered. Their ignorance was my shield. Weeks passed, and I kept moving. I met with Susan, signed affidavits, reviewed timelines. She warned me that cases like this could drag on, that Daniel and Lauren might push back, might try to spin their story. Let them, I said. I've got the truth. And then, something unexpected happened, a chance to face them. Not in a courtroom, but in their own world. Lauren was hosting a fundraising gala for a local education charity. The kind of event she loved, glamorous, public, perfect for her Instagram feed. I'd seen the invitation in my email, forwarded by a colleague from my consulting days. The charity was one I'd worked with years ago, quietly funding scholarships for single mothers and older women going back to school. What Lauren didn't know, what no one knew, was that I was the primary donor behind their biggest grant. The trust I'd set up held the purse strings. I decided to go, not to confront them, not to make a scene, just to remind them who I was. The gala was at a sleek venue downtown, all glass and soft lighting, with waiters carrying trays of champagne. I wore a simple navy dress, my gray hair pulled back, my cracked glasses replaced with a new pair. I didn't need to stand out. I just needed to be there. Lauren was in her element, gliding through the crowd, her smile polished, her dress catching the light. Daniel stood beside her, stiff in a suit, nodding at guests but never quite meeting their eyes. I watched from the edge of the room, a glass of water in my hand, blending into the background like I always had. The MC took the stage, thanking the donors, the sponsors, the visionaries. Then he said my name, or rather, the name of the trust. The Whitman Fund, our largest benefactor, without whom none of this would be possible. Lauren's smile froze. I saw it, even from across the room. Her eyes darted, searching the crowd, until they landed on me. I didn't move, didn't wave, just held her gaze, steady and calm, as the MC went on about the fund's impact. Daniel noticed her pause, followed her eyes, and saw me. His face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had, the ghost of the mother he thought he'd left behind. I walked toward them, not rushing, my steps measured. Lauren's assistant, a young woman with a clipboard and a nervous smile, intercepted me. "This is a private event," she said, her voice clipped. I handed her a business card, one I'd had printed for the occasion. It read, Cathy Harper, Trustee, Whitman Fund. Her eyes widened. She stammered, I'll get Lauren." Lauren came over, her smile tight, her hands clasped too tightly in front of her. "Cathy," she said, her voice like ice wrapped in silk. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I let the moment sit. Let the hum of the gala fill the silence. Then I said, "I'm here to support the cause. You know how much education means to me." Her eyes flicked to the card, then back to me. I could see the gears turning, the realization sinking in. She hadn't known. Neither had Daniel. They thought I was nothing. A retired teacher with a crumbling house and a dwindling bank account. They didn't know I was the one funding their spotlight. And then came the twist, the thing they never saw coming. Susan had called me that morning, her voice low and urgent. "Cathy, we found something else. A recording, a few months earlier, when Lauren started asking about my health. My memory." I'd felt a prickle of unease. She'd arranged a meeting with a doctor, saying it was just a checkup. But her questions were too pointed, too rehearsed. "Do you ever forget things? Cathy? Have you been feeling confused?" I'd played along, but I'd also been careful. I recorded the conversation on my phone, tucked away in my purse. I didn't know why at the time. Just a feeling, like the one that told me to hold onto the house deed. The recording was clear. Lauren's voice, smooth and calculated, asking the doctor to assess my mental capacity, suggesting I might not be fit to manage my affairs, trying to build a case to declare me incompetent, to take control of my assets, my house, my life. But I'd been one step ahead. The recording was with Susan now, locked in her files, ready to be used as evidence. It wasn't just about the forged signature anymore. It was about their plan to erase me, to make me disappear without a fight. At the gala, I didn't mention the recording. I didn't need to. I saw the panic in Lauren's eyes, the way Daniel's hands twitched at his sides. They knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. I leaned in, my voice soft but firm. Everything leaves a trace. Lauren. Every email. Every conversation. It all comes back. I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels on the polished floor blending with the chatter of the crowd. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That night, I sat in my apartment. The rain tapping the balcony. A cup of tea cooling on the table. I opened my notebook and wrote one line: "They underestimated the wrong woman." Susan called the next day. The case was moving forward. The email, the forged document, and now the recording, they were enough to push for charges. Not just for fraud, but for elder abuse and intentional coercion. Oregon had strict laws, and Susan knew how to use them. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt steady, like the ground beneath me was finally solid again. The gala had been their stage, but I'd rewritten the script. They thought they could leave me in the dark, but I was the one holding the light. If you're still here, thank you for staying with me. Some battles aren't fought with shouts or fists. They're fought with quiet steps. With proof. With the strength you find when you refuse to break. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you loved, knowing it would change everything? Hold that thought, quietly, in your heart, because what comes next is when I found my peace. The rain in Portland never really stops. But sometimes it softens, like it's giving you permission to breathe. After the gala, after that moment when Lauren's eyes met mine and she realized I wasn't the woman she thought she could erase, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not relief, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop running from the truth and start walking toward it. The legal process moved slowly. As Susan had warned, courts don't rush, especially in cases like mine: elder abuse, financial coercion, attempted fraud, but they moved steadily. The email Lauren sent by mistake, the forged signature, the recording of her trying to declare me unfit, it was all there. Laid out like pieces of a puzzle no one could deny. Daniel and Lauren fought back at first. Their lawyer sent letters, carefully worded, offering to resolve this privately. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that they were stressed, that they never meant to hurt me. But the recording was clear. Lauren's voice, asking that doctor to question my memory, my mind, my right to my own life. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Susan didn't flinch. She filed the papers, sealed the evidence, and pushed for a protective order. By the time the court reviewed the case, Daniel and Lauren's world was unraveling. Their shared accounts were frozen. Their access to the house deed blocked. Their plans to sell my home stopped cold. The judge didn't make a spectacle of it. No cameras, no crowds, just a quiet ruling. Daniel and Lauren were barred from contacting me, from touching my assets, from stepping foot in my life without permission. They'd pay a price, too: community service, mandatory counseling, a financial penalty that stung more than they expected. But I didn't care about the punishment. I cared about the truth being spoken, out loud, in a courtroom, where it couldn't be ignored. I didn't go back to that house. I didn't need to. The deed was mine, the trust was secure, and the $15 million was safe in the Whitman Fund. Doing what I'd always wanted, helping women like me. Women over 60, women who'd been overlooked, find their way back to themselves. I called it the Harper Scholars. A foundation, not for fame or glory, but for purpose. I worked with a small team, women I'd met through my years teaching, consulting, living. We set up scholarships for older women to learn new skills, to start businesses, to go back to school. Women who'd spent their lives giving to others, only to find themselves alone when the giving was done. I moved to a small house near a park in Portland, where the rain felt like a friend and the leaves fell like quiet promises. It wasn't grand, just a cottage with a tiny porch, a fireplace, and a window where I could watch the world wake up. I'd sit there in the mornings, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, my notebook open, writing not about Daniel or Lauren, but about me. I wrote about the years I'd spent silent, thinking love meant swallowing my voice. I wrote about the nights I'd doubted myself, wondering if I'd been too much or not enough. I wrote to the woman I was at 40, who stayed up late grading papers while Daniel slept. To the woman at 50, who paid off his car loan when he couldn't. To the woman at 60, who buried Tom and kept going, even when the grief felt like it would swallow her whole. I forgave her. I thanked her, because she got me here. One morning, As the rain pattered against my window, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. In Daniel's handwriting. It was short, uneven, like his hand had shaken as he wrote. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been lost. Caught up in Lauren's world. In the pressure to keep up. He said he didn't know how it got this far. He asked me to remember the boy he used to be. The one who loved books and swings and my homemade cookies. I read it once. Then again. I folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of anger, but because forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a path you walk. Slow and deliberate. And I wasn't ready yet. I didn't hate Daniel. I didn't hate Lauren. I just didn't need them to define me anymore. The Harper Scholars grew. We funded our first program that spring, coding classes for women in their 60s. Art workshops for widows. Business grants for mothers whose children had moved on. At our first meeting, I sat with a woman named Margaret, 67, who'd lost her home when her son sold it out from under her. She told me she thought she was done. That life had passed her by. Then she smiled, her eyes bright, and said, "But I'm learning to paint now. Turns out, I'm pretty good." I listened, not just to reply, but to hold her story, to make space for it. And in that moment, I realized something. I'd spent years thinking silence was my weakness. But it was my strength. Silence let me see clearly. Silence let me plan. Silence let me rebuild. One evening, as I walked through the park near my house, the rain just a mist now, I stopped by a bench under an old oak. I thought about that night in the dark house. The cracked glasses, the locked door. I thought about the woman who sat on that floor, cold and alone, and I whispered to her, "You didn't deserve that. Not the silence, not the betrayal, not the years of being pushed aside. You didn't deserve any of it. And you survived it anyway." That night, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that feels like rest, not escape. The rain was still falling when I woke, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. If you've ever felt like you were left in the dark, like your voice didn't matter, like the people you loved forgot who you were, this story is for you. Share your thoughts, your own quiet moments, in the comments below. You never know, your words might be the light someone else needs to find their way. This isn't just a story. It's a reminder, the dark doesn't last forever. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is choose to turn on your own light. Life doesn't always give you the apologies you deserve, or the endings you expect. But it gives you choices. To stay silent or to speak. To shrink or to stand. To let someone else's story define you. Or to write your own. I chose to write mine, not with anger, but with purpose. And in that choice, I found something I'd almost forgotten, myself.